Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode number 48 of the John Riley Project. It's Friday, May 3rd. Yes, it's 3rd. Yeah, May 3rd, 2019. It's Friday. Happy Friday, TGIF. And we're going to talk sports today. I really want to talk about the mighty 1090. Just one of the best, actually the whole era of sports talk radio in San Diego. This is a big moment because the mighty 1090 is gone. So I really want to kind of get into that. But just what's going on right now, things I'm thinking about. Padres just had a big win, 11-2 in Atlanta. They're coming home for a 3-game series with the LA Dodgers, and every game at Petco is sold out. I mean, when was the last time that's happened in San Diego? This is fantastic. I mean, people are rallying, and San Diego always supports the winner. They always have, and it's great to see that there's buzz here with the Padres. I was talking to my buddy Dennis over at the Postal Annex here in Poway, next to Target. He's a big Dodger fan, so we've got a little friendly wager for lunch next week to see who wins this 3-game set in San Diego. So I'm excited about these 3 games that are coming up. This will be a really good test for the Padres. Should be a lot of fun. Let's talk about the mighty 1090. So, this is a big time sports talk radio station. We have 3 stations, or we had 3 in San Diego, but 1090 was clearly the leader of the 3. And it was sort of like an evolution because, a long time ago, it was the mighty 690. And that's how I got introduced to all of this. I went to UCSD, graduated in 87. I went to work up in Los Angeles for a couple of years. And then I came back to San Diego in 1989. And that's when I first discovered the mighty 690, which at the time was really kind of like a news talk station. And then they had a sports segment in the drive time bit. And that was my first introduction to Lee Hacksaw Hamilton. And oh my God, was I blown away by this guy. I mean, it was like, where did he come from? Lee Hacksaw Hamilton put on this awesome sports talk radio program and just filled you in, not just on the main sports, or the big 3, I should say, baseball, football, and basketball, but he got into auto racing and tennis, and it was just electrified. This is 1989. The internet didn't exist at all. And usually I was getting my sports updates by reading the paper, or maybe, if I wanted more detail on other teams, I would sometimes buy the USA Today. And, I was involved in the early days there of fantasy sports and, baseball rotisserie leagues. And we were always hungry for information. And before the internet, it was just so hard to get that info. But Lee Hacksaw Hamilton had this, and it was just awesome. Just some of the things that when you hear Hacksaw, you hear that voice and some of his catchphrases that to this day, I still repeat them just when I'm talking to people, especially people that get it. My kids probably have heard them too many times, but I am bleeping brilliant. I am the franchise. Poway Penasquitos, get those lines lit. He'd have his, checking the high-speed sports wire for the best 15 minutes in sports, and this Lee Hacksaw Hamilton had this huge ego, which made it so fun. It was just so exciting. The Blowtorch Signal, 50,000 watts from Baja to the Canadian Rockies. And just, oh man, I just love that. And then, Hacksaw would go on, I got my summer book tour, or I'd have my tour of the NFL training camps. And he just took himself so seriously to the point that he was almost a caricature of himself. And then every once in a while, he'd have these awful gaffes, which made it so funny because he was so serious about it. And, back when the Padres had Yasmani Grandal was playing ball here, and Hacksaw got tripped up in his words, and he started calling him Yasmani Grand Balls. And you just picture it in the Hacksaw voice, Yasmani Grand Balls, and it's just fantastic. So I just love Hacksaw. I mean, what are some of the other ones? And like some of his other catchphrases have made their way onto the Jim Rome show. Like reaction, agree or disagree. Good night now. Just so many great things. So just loved Hacksaw. And, he really got it started. I mean, he said I am the franchise. And he was back then, because, he came over here from Arizona and got the sports talk radio going. And then shortly after I came back to San Diego, it was later, I think in 89, that the Mighty 690 had gone from, mostly news, a little bit of sports, and they went all the way. And they said, we're going to be a 24-hour sports talk radio station. And it was only the second station in America that had done it. And there was a station in New York City, WFAN, had done it. So this was a big deal, here on the West Coast. And then they had this signal that, it was easy. It was clear as a bell to pick up when you were in LA, Orange County. And then at night, it would travel, literally Baja to the Canadian Rockies. So at night, when that AM signal would skip, you get it in Northern California. And it was just awesome. Because, before that, when you want to get sports news, like on the radio, you get, 2 minutes of it here or there. The local news would do a little bit. ESPN was kind of going, but still there was nothing sort of local. There was nothing that had some, it was electric back then. And I was just mesmerized. His best 15 minutes in sports talk or sports radio, that was must listen to radio. And I remember I was working here for a computer company in San Diego, and one of my office mates, Don Begg, who I haven't seen him in a long time, but Don, a great man. And we would talk about Hacksaw. He was like, did you listen to him tonight? And then we would like compare notes, and we were just so like mesmerized by the whole thing. It was just awesome. And yeah, it was like Hacksaw descended from another planet. And then I remember I called in one time, and this is, back when, my friend Jack, who was really still a great friend of mine from college, he had started doing baseball rotisserie leagues like in 1988 or 89. And this is before fantasy baseball got going. And to my buddy Jack's credit, he was actually doing it on a Lotus 123 spreadsheet, and he would get data and update it. It was just mind blowing. He pulled it off in the pre-internet days. But I had my own little roster, and back then I remember I called into Hacksaw, and Tony Gwynn was on my roster. And, this is Tony Gwynn in 89, and he's still a great ball player. But, in his early days, Gwynn got a lot of stolen bases. But as he got older, he slowed down a bit. And I remember thinking, well, I'm going to call Hacksaw because I had Gwynn on my team, and I was hoping for more stolen bases. So clearly Hacksaw would know, right? So, I call in and go, yeah, this is John from San Diego. And what do you think about Tony Gwynn, and why isn't he getting the steals? And then Hacksaw, I can't remember what he said, but it was, I'm gonna guess and try to remember. It was probably something like, well, Alan Wiggins is the leadoff hitter, and we expect Alan Wiggins to be the table setter, and Gwynn is batting 2, so he's just gonna move the runner over, try to punch it through the hole when they set Wiggins in motion. He would just wing it. He would freelance and get into this persona of his, and it was just awesome. So, and then I don't know if you've ever seen Lee Hamilton. I remember the first time I saw him, I was just knocked over, because you see a guy on the radio and has this amazing voice and this huge ego, and when you see him, you're not sure what to expect. It's almost like it's like seeing, like the first time you saw Rick Astley, you have this big voice and he's like a little guy. But for Hamilton, he was like this like mop-haired guy with a big mustache and kind of baggy clothes, and it was almost like the first time I remember seeing Bill King for the first time. I don't know if you remember him, but he was the play-by-play guy for the Oakland A's and the Golden State Warriors, and he was fantastic, by the way. In fact, Bill King is an interesting guy. His roots go all the way back with Vin Scully in New York City. But I remember the first time I saw Bill King, and I saw this guy with the handlebar mustache, and I was like, whoa, who is this guy? It was a similar thing when I first saw Lee Hacksaw Hamilton. And then I later found out that, he lives nearby. He either lives in Rancho Bernardo or Rancho Penasquitos. And both of my children, Shannon and Trevor, have worked over at Mama Cella's, which is a restaurant in Rancho Bernardo. And I remember one time my daughter came home and she said, "You're not going to believe who was in our restaurant." And it was Hacksaw. And I'm like, "You got to be kidding, really?" And I go, "What did he order?" And she said, "Yeah, he ordered a meatball sandwich." I could just picture it. It's like, Hacksaw wants a meatball sandwich with Parmesan on top. But it's just great. And so, you can still catch, Lee Hacksaw. He's still, in the sports radio game. He's not on the air anymore, but sometimes you'll be listening to a press conference, for Aztec basketball or for the Padres, and, the camera will be on, Coach Dutcher or on manager Andy Green, and then you'll hear the media firing questions. And usually there's always some guy in the back of the room, and you can hear Hacksaw's voice. I mean, you spot it in a minute. So I love that he's still involved, and he's got his own website going. He's active on social media, and he's been interviewed by a number of people, and there's a really, really good interview of him by Scott Kaplan. And Scott Kaplan, one of the other hosts on 1090, who was, just let go, unfortunately, with the whole crew there. Scott Kaplan has his own solo podcast, and he did an interview with Hamilton, with Lee Hacksaw Hamilton, and it's fantastic because it was Kaplan was just, really trying to get to know Lee as a person, but Hacksaw's ego just took over, and he was just talking about how I invented sports radio in San Diego, and it just took over the whole persona of Hacksaw, and it was just awesome. And so there's a few other, like if you search online, there's a few other local podcasts. I think Gwintelligence has a interview with him, but they're always so cool because you get a glimpse into Hacksaw, and you can tell that he would love to be back on the radio again. And I would love for him to be back on the radio again because he's really good. And he, some people got tired of his style, and I understand that, but he took his job very seriously, and he still does. And he has such passion for what he does, and he's got this sort of old school way he goes about it. And if you can understand him and appreciate him for that, then you just love him. And he came back and he was on 1090 for a while in the mornings, and that kind of worked, kind of didn't. But I just love Lee Hacksaw Hamilton, and he was a big part of my whole relationship with sports in San Diego because I was born in San Francisco. I was raised on the peninsula in the Bay Area. So I was born a Giants fan, 49ers, Warriors, and still a fan of the Raiders and the A's. And then I came down here to go to college at UCSD, and I was still a San Francisco sports guy. But I remember when I moved from LA back to San Diego in '89, that's when my allegiance really started to change. And then the San Diego teams became number one, and the Bay Area teams became my number two. And 690, 1090, Hacksaw was all a big part of it. So for me, this is a big deal, that 1090 is shutting its doors. It's emotional, for a lot of people. They feel like they're losing family. But yeah, I mean, so anyways, I just want to retrace some of this, and let's talk about Jim Rome. So Romy came over to 690, like, I don't know, maybe around in 1990 or so. And this is after they had gone to the 24-hour sports format. And I remember he had the Scrub Saturday show, and he called it the Scrub Saturday show because all the marquee guys got, Monday through Friday, the morning time, the drive time, the midday. And it was all the rookies, the free agents, they were the ones that got the weekend shows. And he would joke that it was the Scrub Saturday show because he felt he was a scrub, like he was just, a plebe essentially. But so many great things came from that, because I remember even then listening to Rome, and now Jim Rome is nationally syndicated. He's incredibly famous, but he started his glossary, and I remember back then he would call people blockheads, and that was really probably one of his first. He calls them the gloss. Some of the first terms he used to use, and then his program was so unique because he was really edgy. He was really in your face, and he embraced popular culture. And then he had this smack talk, where he would, he was very aggressive in what he said, not at all polite, where Hacksaw was really into his own, like his big ego. Rome had a big ego, but he was able to direct it, to the outside world in a way that, he would launch bombs out to the outside world, but he did it in a smart way. He wasn't reckless, but he did it in a way to build his audience, and his audience loved him for it. And they would repeat a lot of his smack talk to the point that he started calling them clones. And that's what they are to this day. And this all started on that Scrub Saturday show. I remember I was living in Encinitas. This is, again, in the early 90s, and I was renting a house with like 3 other guys, and you just have there was no internet. So if you were hanging around the house doing whatever you're doing, you'd turn on the radio and you'd listen to whoever it was, or if you're in your car driving around. And so on Saturdays it was Jim Rome, and I was like, yeah, this guy's pretty cool. I like him. And so he developed, and he eventually got the midday spot, but actually no, he went. He later got the late night spot. It was like from 7 to 11 or 7 to midnight on Monday through Friday. And again, these are his roots, and a lot of his roots you'll hear him talk about on his show now, currently in 2019. And so he would always play the bumper song before his last segment when he had the late night show was the song Up All Night by the Boomtown Rats. And he still does it now, even if he has a daytime show and, it's 2 p.m. or whatever time it is that he has his very final segment, he'll always play that song up all night. And I just think, oh, that's cool. And I bet 99% of his listeners don't get it. They don't understand it. But since I was there following him in the beginning, it just feels good. It takes me back to that time. But yeah, he ended up getting a midday spot on 690. His stature kept growing. And then suddenly he was syndicated, which, that was like incredible. Like, what is syndication? He ended up getting picked up. I remember there was a station in Vegas, a station in Albuquerque, and maybe one other station got it going. And then eventually it steamrolled and he went nationwide and he just blew up. And then you remember he had that episode with Jim Everett, and that really put him on the map because, he was building his audience. He went nationwide, and then he got a shot on, I don't know if it was ESPN2 or some TV, and they brought his talk show to TV. And he used to always call Jim Everett Chris Everett, because back then, when he was the quarterback of the LA Rams, he would take the sack probably a little faster than a lot of other quarterbacks, and he was implying that Jim Everett was soft. And so in the show, he was interviewing Jim Everett, and I mean, literally a live program across the table from him, and he called him Chris. And Jim Everett wasn't taking any of it. And he said to Rome, he says, if you call me Chris Everett one more time, that'll be the last time you call me Chris Everett. And sure enough, Rome said Chris Everett, and Jim Everett flew over the table, tackled him, and it was like the buzz of sports radio and sports television. And it was that incident that made Jim Rome even bigger. So it was just amazing to watch the guy. And he's a very skilled radio TV guy, because he knew how to, he was very smart in how he went about it. When he was talking with his callers, and, he had his smack talk and his gloss, and, he was this cool, edgy guy. But when he actually had an interview with a guest, he was very different. He was very respectful. He still had some fun, a little bit of edginess, but he would never put his interview subject on the spot. He would never embarrass them. He would never throw in gotcha questions. And I appreciated that in him. And I think that helped him build a strong rapport with a lot of those athletes, to the point that they wanted to be on the show. They didn't feel that they were in any jeopardy of getting zinged or being embarrassed. And so even when I started this podcast, we started by interviewing the candidates here that were running for office for Poway Mayor, Poway City Council, and Poway, School Board. And I kind of tried to do the same thing as I was thinking about Jim Rome. I was thinking, these people, I want to just interview and get to know them, but I don't want to embarrass them. I don't want to make them regret the visit, because I want them to come back, and I still do. And so I still try to conduct my interviews that way. I think I can do a little better job at my interviewing. I think I can do better asking some more pointed questions, keeping the pace of the interview going by interjecting. Sometimes I let my guests kind of go on a little too long, but in some ways that makes them interesting, I think, because they get to tell their story. But anyways, I just appreciated Jim Rome for how he went about his business. And then he graduated from UC Santa Barbara right around the same time I graduated from UCSD. So, here I am. I ended up going work in the computer industry and the marketing industry. And you always look at these other guys and I'm thinking, you think, what if, you think this goes back to Pete Neal and eureka moments, right? What if you had made that decision at another point of your life and instead pursued that as a career? And, sometimes I have those fantasies. It would be fun to do that, to do what Hacksaw and Jim Rome have done and just be in the world of sports. I mean, it would be fantastic. So in some ways, I'm trying to do a little bit of that here right now in my little podcast here in Poway, and I hope we can accomplish some of it. And I think we can have some fun. But there's another really good interview. If you look on YouTube, and it's Darren Smith, who's another 1090 guy, interviewing Jim Rome. And I think it's at one of the Super Bowl Radio Row interviews. And Jim Rome will talk about his roots in San Diego, and it's fantastic. It's a really good interview. So I'll include a link of that in the show notes for this podcast. But yeah, who else was there in the early days of 690? Remember Steve Hartman and the Loose Cannons? And he was a good guy. He was kind of a nerdy guy, which I appreciated. And you could ask him any sports trivia question and boom, he would know it. He was incredible. And, he built up a program with Chet Forty, who we got to know and love. And, Chet Forty, was the producer of Monday Night Football. And, Chet had his own demons. He eventually passed away, which was really sad. But Chet was a good guy, and he was replaced by Philly Billy Warrendell, and him and Hartman were going at it. But Hartman was always still an LA guy, and I think he's still on the radio, isn't he? He's still on 1360. He's back in San Diego now. But I always liked him. And there were a lot of other names from the early days of 690. Jeannie Zelasco, who you'll now sometimes see on Fox Sports. I think she does some stuff with the Lakers. Who else? Steve Mason, John Ireland. Remember him? He was a KUSI sports guy. He was on I think 690 for a while. And now he's in Phoenix, and he's doing really well for himself. So John Ireland was there. Craig Elston, I think, was there in the early days, I think. And now Craig is, he's the VP of marketing for the San Diego Sockers, and you'll still see him helping out Scott and BR on 1090. And he's always kind of a big part of the San Diego sports community. And who else? Chris Ello. I love Chris Ello. And, he's doing work with the Padres now. And it seemed like Craig Elston and Chris Ello were always kind of there on weekends. They a lot of times would do things together. I always liked those guys. They were really friendly, and they offered a lot of good content. And then Joe Totino, the Bulldog, he's been with them like forever. And I saw video clips of Totino on Scott Kaplan's Twitter feed, and when all the 1090 folks are being shown the door, which is just so sad. But just so many great names there. And even Coach John Quintero was there in the early days. And I think back then in 690, I think he told the story that, he was almost like the maintenance guy in the building. He changed the light bulbs in the offices, and then he eventually got his opportunity to get on the air. And, Coach John Quintero, of course, big sports guy. He was a coach at Torrey Pines High School. He'll tell you all the stories. So many good people that have come through that station. But then how about the era in Mighty 690 history when the 690 became the home of the Chargers. And then Hacksaw blew up again. And it was Hacksaw and Jim Laslovic and I think Philly Billy. They had the three men in the booth. And they had these epic pregame and postgame shows, which were really innovative. And Hacksaw talked a lot about that in the solo podcast with Scott Kaplan, which you got to go seek out. Scott Kaplan's solo podcast with Hacksaw. It's a really good one. But remember, Hacksaw, he sometimes get a little bit lazy. He'd be going like, everybody into the pattern, and then there was that one game. It was that the Chargers were playing the Seahawks, and I don't know, it was a punt, and the Chargers had the ball on the 1, and it was like, Stan Humphries, and it's like 1st down and 99 for the Chargers, and then sure enough, Humphries connects with Tony Martin. They get a touchdown, a 99-yard play, and you're just like, oh, these are just those special times, because Hacksaw was still Hacksaw. He wasn't the polished, play-by-play guy. He had all that ego, that personality, and he was good. He was good at what he did, but he was still full of himself, which still made it fun. If you could see it for what it was. And so that was he was the guy when the Chargers went to the Super Bowl, and they had that great 94 season. They were in the Super Bowl in 95. So Hacksaw was there during that era. So then where did we go? The modern era of 1090, and I'm going to call it the modern era because I think it's around the time that 690 went off the air. I don't know why they did. And then they went to the mighty 1090, which had a strong signal, but not as good as 690. And a lot of the hosts moved over, and I think the ownership, was it John Lynch, I think, took over, or did he transition? I don't know exactly the mechanics of the business relationship. But then it became 1090, and then, Coach John Quintera had his own show. And I don't know if you ever listened to Dave and Jeff, and they used to be never, I don't think they were really ever on 1090, but they were always on the other station, like 1360, or they were on KFMB. And they still now have a really good podcast. I encourage you to check that out. And, Jeff Dotseth, who was always the snarky kind of guy of that pair, Jeff Dotseth will do the greatest impersonation of Coach John Quintera. And so whenever you hear Coach John Quintera, you hear Jeff Dotseth's impersonation of Coach John Quintera, which is just fantastic. Coach John was good. And then, of course, Scott and BR, and I remember Kaplan came over to the radio station, and I guess he had done some work with CBS in New York, and they paired him up with, Billy Ray Smith, and that ended up being a really good pairing because, in many ways, Kaplan was driving the bus and Billy Ray was would kind of compliment him. And it was just a really nice match. And Billy Ray offered that San Diego credibility. And then Kaplan sort of had this platform where he freelanced and he, ended up getting into a lot of trouble. I mean, he made some disparaging comments about a female basketball reporter, and they ended up getting fired, and then they came back. And then the other cool thing is I remember I would see Scott Kaplan a lot because my son, Trevor, is the same age as his son. I think his name is Justin. And they played baseball together. So his son was at Torrey, and then my son at Poway High. And so whenever the games would occur between those two teams, I'd always see Scott Kaplan there. And I didn't really intrude and how do I say this? Get in there, introduce myself. But I always saw him there, and I always appreciated he was there. And he's a good guy. So love seeing that. And then Darren Smith and Marty Caswell, they were also part of that crew that was just let go. I always appreciated Darren Smith because he was always much more level-headed than a lot of the other hosts. And he, very intelligent guy, and I think he used to say he wants it to be more of a high IQ sports talk radio, and he provided that. And you could tell that baseball was his first love, and he's a St. John's guy. So I always appreciated him, and he'd let you in a little bit on his personal life. I think he just got married recently. And then his producer, Marty Caswell, wonderful. And Darren, to his credit, would let his producer essentially be his co-host. And Marty did a great job. And Marty's done a lot of wonderful things in sports radio here in San Diego, and a lot of, social media. And so I love those two as well. And I don't know what Scott and BR are going to end up doing, but I got to believe that for sure Darren and Marty have got to land somewhere. I mean, the two of them are just too good. So hopefully their future is bright. But then, then the morning show, had all these different people. I remember they had Dan Cilio for a while, who was just awful. Just bigoted and just so over the top football. And, I'm more of a baseball, basketball guy, but still, I appreciate football, but it was just never in balance. It was always just so lopsided football. And then just some of the comments he would make, and you talk about Darren Smith being high IQ sports radio. Dan Cilio was the opposite of that. So I was so happy when they jettisoned him. And then he ended up going to 97.3 The Fan, and then he just got shown the door a few weeks ago. So anyways, but then Hacksaw was there in the morning, and now they eventually settled in with Ben Higgins and Stephen Woods, and that ended up being a great program, and I really liked it. Ben Higgins, I had always known him as the TV guy, and on TV he was pretty conservative, straight ahead. But I got to know him as a person on sports radio, and that guy is funny as hell, and his Twitter is fantastic. I mean, so Ben Higgins, there's another side to him that's very witty, very sharp, that I really appreciate. And then Stephen Woods, a little bit more crude, but I enjoyed following him and learning about his past. So again, I mean, Ben Higgins is going to land on his feet. Hopefully Stephen Woods does as well. And then, sometimes you'll see Hacksaw in and out of television as well, since he left the radio. I know he was on, Channel 5 or Channel 6? But I've often said, like, have you ever seen Hacksaw and who's that guy that was on KUSI? He was the Consumer Reports guy. His name is escaping me. Why can't I think of it? But he was the guy that would try to get, the business that had screwed over a customer, try to get him on the spot. And I always thought that Hacksaw and that other guy, they looked like almost identical. Like, have you ever seen him in the same place? But frick, I can't remember the guy's name. It's going to come to me right after the show. If you're listening or watching, you're probably screaming it right now. For me, again, in the 90s, for me, sports radio was the golden era because it was before the internet, or really before the internet became big. But then, my situation changed. So, I started my own business in the early 2000s, and then I was working from home, or rather than commuting a longer distance to work, I was only commuting inside Poway. And so I was in the car a lot less. So I ended up listening to less sports radio. And then, as we got into the 2010s, Sirius XM became a thing. And then one of my previous cars, I've talked about my electric cars. One of them was my BMW i3 that I had from, right from 2015 to 2018. That car did not have AM radio. I couldn't believe it. I remember I was in the middle of buying the car, and I was leasing it through my business. And I remember when we did the final, walkthrough, when they really go over all the features, I just assumed there was AM radio, and I found out there was no AM radio. I'm like, what are you crazy? I mean, I have to have AM radio. And they said that the i3, the BMW said, because it's an electric car and the AM signal, ended up getting static, and they didn't feel that was up to BMW's quality standards, so they just got rid of the AM signal. And I was like, oh man. But then the guy told me that there were people that could hack the BMW i3 and actually turn on the AM radio for you. I never ended up pursuing it, but it was around that time I started listening to the radio less. And, it got to the point where, I would stream 1090 sometimes when I'm like in my office on my computer. I would sometimes turn it on, but it was still a little bit awkward. Now in the world of podcasts, and I'm doing podcasts and I'm listening to podcasts, I would still listen to them, but it still wasn't the same. It wasn't, it was more of an accessory to my life, where in the 90s, sports talk radio was very deeply woven into how I went about my day. So it's kind of sad, you know, and then now that 1090 is off the air, like in our master bathroom here in our house, I still have like a little radio that I would plug in, and 1090 would I mean, the 690 came in great, right? But then the 1090 signal was not as good, but I could still get it good enough. And so in the mornings, like when I'm getting out of the shower and getting dressed, I would always have that radio station on. And now that it's gone, and then I thought, well, maybe I can find 1360, or I could find 97.3. You know, now that Cilio's gone, I'll listen to that station in the morning. But I ended up literally going through every station on FM and AM, and I only got Spanish language stations or Christian radio stations. I mean, I probably got 7 or 8 of each, but I couldn't find any sports radio. And granted, I live in Poway, and I'm right next to Rancho Bernardo, and the old timers in Poway refer to RB as radio blockage. And it's so true. It's like when you're in Rancho Bernardo, the radio signal gets really weak. And so where I am here in Poway, you know, my signal isn't all that great either. So I literally 2 days ago, I took that radio out of my bathroom and rolled up the cord and said, it's end of an era. And I put it in my garage, and it's probably going to end up going into electronics recycling or the Goodwill at some point. It's kind of sad. But, you know, I often wonder, like, what's the future of radio? You know, with so much streaming content available, and a lot of people are switching their behavior. And you know, I saw some of the ratings, you know, because the 1090 was boasting about their ratings relative to 1360 and 97.3, but they were only like, you know, in the small thousands, you know, 1,000, 2,000 people listening, if I recall. Still pretty modest numbers. And you think, wow, you know, technology is changing. The world is changing. And so, you know, what's the future of radio? So I still will listen now to 97.3, specifically when I'm in my car and I want to listen to the Padre game. But that's probably now the only time I listen to AM or FM radio. So if I want to listen to sports, I'm typically listening to the MLB station or ESPN. I probably should, you know, listen more to 97.3, but still I'm not in my car very often. So I guess as technology has evolved, my patterns have been disrupted. The loss of AM in my car a few years back disrupted myself. Now 1090 is gone, and my radio in my bathroom, everything's disrupted. So I'm not sure what's going to happen with me and my behavior and what I'm going to listen to. So I'm very curious to know what's going to happen with, you know, all the 1090 guys. You know, when 1090 closed down, you should have seen the outpouring of emotion on social media. There were people that were, obviously very concerned about the well-being, the personal lives of all the people that worked at that station. Not just the hosts, but the support people, the producers, the office staff. It was sad. And, you know, to a great degree, a lot of people felt the 1090 group was like their family, and their family may be jettisoned, may be dispersed. So, you know, Scott and BR, they were broadcasting from the Callaway Golf studio in Carlsbad. You know, is that a long-term deal? I don't know. It feels like it's probably short-term. I haven't actually listened or watched. I've only seen clips online. But I'm wondering if what that is going to end up being. Then, like I said, I know Darren and Marty, they've got to land somewhere. If not locally, maybe some other city would pick them up. But, you know, Darren just got married. I don't know about Marty's personal life, but could they move? I don't know. But you wonder and you think about him. You care about him. And then, you know, Ben Higgins, you know, he's going to stick on, you know, television. He'll still have that gig. Stephen Woods, I don't know. What's he going to do? Totino, and, you know, again, all these people, you wonder. So, you know, hopefully some of them will do what Dave and Jeff have done, and they've got their podcast going. Not sure, you know, how viable of a financial model it is for Dave and Jeff. Hopefully they're making some money. I know they got a Patreon page just like I do for the John Riley Project. But are these guys going to evolve more into the podcasting space? I don't know. So it's interesting how things change. I mean, even just last night, I was watching clips because, again, you get so much of your media content from social media. And then there you'll be alerted to clips from other shows. And I was just watching one about Dan Patrick. And remember, he was the ESPN host for so long, him and Keith Olbermann. And then Dan Patrick ended up leaving, and he was at NBC for a while. And he still has his own show, which is like a podcast, but it's on television. And he was talking about some of his own health issues. And so then you're like wondering what the future is for Dan Patrick. And it's fascinating to follow all these people. So anyways, I just wanted to do this segment about the Mighty 1090. I loved the 690. I still to this day, Hacksaw has a very, very special place in my heart. Jim Rome, I don't listen to him really anymore. But in his days when he was here in San Diego, he was a big part of my life too. And I still will listen to Rome occasionally, but again, I'm disconnected from AM radio, it seems. And I still, Scott, BR, Darren, Marty, love them, and I got to really appreciate Higgins and Woods. It's special. And so you just kind of wonder what the future is for them. I'm rooting for them. I'm rooting for them to land in a good spot. But I was just listening to, the interview that I mentioned of Darren Smith interviewing Jim Rome. And Jim Rome said originally he was hesitant to social media, but he said, if you don't embrace the newest thing, if you're not on the forefront, you're going to get run over from behind. And so I think that analogy is playing out here with the 1090 hosts. They're going to have to evolve as the marketplace has evolved, as technology has evolved. So let's root for all of them. So best wishes to our friends at 1090. So anyways, I give my standard plug at this point in the podcast. If you like what you're seeing here and you want to support the John Riley Project podcast, share it with a friend, share it on social media. Let your coworkers know, or if you're at a Little League game and you're talking to a friend in the bleachers, let them know about the John Riley Project. They just had this podcast about 1090. We went walking down memory lane talking about 690 and Hacksaw and 1090. So tell a friend. And if you like it, you can give a rating on iTunes. You can, write a review on iTunes. That would be really helpful. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel. If you want to donate, you go to my website, johnrileyproject.com. You can offer a donation through our Patreon page. You can, if you're a business, you want to sponsor, we'd love to have you as a sponsor. We'll talk about your business. We'll read ads about your business. We'll do a remote podcast at your location. So a lot of fun things we can do. So if you're interested in supporting us, reach out. There are a lot of ways that you can help me and I can help you, and we can have a win-win relationship. And follow me on social media. That would be great. So I've got the Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. I've got my little special John Riley Project Insiders Group page, so you can, that's a Facebook closed group, but you can request permission, answer a few questions. I let everybody in. So you can reach out there as well. So just want to thank you all for, if you made it this far on the Mighty 1090 episode for the John Riley Project. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. I'm going to be like Chris Paddock, man. I'm going to be relentless. I just keep wanting to churning these things out. But I got to leave you with a quote, and it's got to come from Hacksaw, right? So it's Poway Penasquitos, get those lines lit. I want to talk sports with you. So this is John Riley, the John Riley Project. Thank you for joining me. Have a great Friday. It's May 3rd, and have a wonderful weekend. Bye-bye.